welcome to Pay It Forward. Now, I've received so many requests for such a long time for a mouse. So I've put together a little pattern. I was happy to oblige you all with this one because I used to make a lot of these, and it's such a sweet little pattern. I've adapted it for you a little bit so it's a little bit easier. You get to make all of the goodies as well. I'm going to walk you through every step of the way. She's a little mini me. She's even been fabric shopping. So I hope you're going to enjoy making her. I've got her free pattern all ready for you. It is in the description box below. I'll also put it number 1 in the comments for you so it's easy to find. You'll be able to print your pattern templates out from that link, and when you go to print them out, make sure that you set your printer in the settings to be printing at actual size. Very important with this little project that all of your pattern pieces are right. So I also include all of my seam allowances within the pattern, so you don't have to worry about that at all. So let's get busy making my little patchwork mouse. Right, let's get started with our materials and requirements here today. And we will start with our little head pieces. So the little head is made from felt, and I have interfaced my felt with my fusible woven cotton interfacing to keep it all nice and flexible. And we've got our 2 side head pieces, and we've got a head gusset. Make sure you add all of the markings that I've got on your pattern templates. They're very important. And then we have the 2 ears. Now I've made mine from double felt, and double felt is just 2 pieces of felt joined together with fusible webbing. I've actually got a video that talks to you about preparing felt for sewing, so I'll put that link up the top there for you. So you need those 2 there. And then you're going to need your arm pieces. Now the arm pieces are also cut from felt because of the way that we're putting it together. And I actually cut them from felt which has fusible webbing applied. The reason for that is it just makes the felt a little bit more stable. I don't want interfacing because it will be too thick and the white core will show. But that little bit of the fusible webbing glue that goes on there does help with this, putting this one together. That's a little arm all done. So, and with those arms, you're going to need a chenille stick. So a couple of chenille sticks, because that's how we get the little movement posability in those arms, and it makes it very, very easy to put together. So that's our arms, and then we're going to need our body. So you can choose a fabric that you want for your main dress piece, and I've gone for a very busy, quite a sort of eclectic little print there. I absolutely love it. I was so excited when I found it. And those pieces are interfaced as well. And we're also going to need a base piece that covers over the base once we put the base in. And our base support is, you've got your template there to cut that one. I actually cut mine from mat board. I cut 2 pieces of picture framing mat board, and I glue them together with PVA glue. So that's really strong. It's every bit as strong as a little wooden disc. So you've got those there. So for the front of our little dress, you can really do anything to this to and create that sort of little look, and it depends on the style you're going for. I'm going for a bit of a sort of folksy sort of cute look, so I'm just going to be adding a piece of lace down the center there. You can see I've threaded a piece of ribbon through as well. We are going to have a little Peter Pan collar there, which sits around the neck, and I'll add a couple of little beads as little buttons there. We're then going to be adding a skirt over the top of this, and I've actually got the same fabric. Of course, you can mix and match your fabrics, but I really want to give the impression that this is a whole little dress. And of course, I've given you a couple of little applique shapes there. I like to do a little applique on the front of the skirt using those bold colours again. These have fusible webbing applied. The fabric for the skirt is just the fabric on its own, so no extra required there. And our little felt collar is actually just felt. I want that to stay quite soft and subtle. So I'm also going to be adding a little lace trim on the base of that skirt. And we're going to be joining the head to the body with a joint. So I'm using a 20mm joint, which is what you need. I'm using my system with nut and bolt system. I have also a video on jointing. I'll put the link up the top for that one there also, for you to have a look at that. Alternatively, you can use two 20mm buttons, nice flat buttons. It doesn't matter whether they're 2-hole or 4-hole. We're only using 2 of those holes. And we can do a button joint, a button thread joint, which is also in that video, so you can check that out. But I'll be using that one today. And then we're going to make up a little bag. So we've got our 4 bag pieces, which are felt, and they do need to be cut from felt, and they are interfaced also. I'm going for that nice honey colour. And then we have our inside pieces, our liner for our bag. So a pretty little print, something that works for your project. And we're also going to need a handle for that little basket, and I use braided cord. So this is just old-fashioned braided cord, and you can get any colour that you like. I actually have a little trick that I'm going to show you where I wrap that cord, which gives you a really stable little handle, while still leaving those ends for us to hop into the seam. So I will show you how to do that, and I've done that just with some pearl thread there. So just a little length of that one, and by the same token you're going to be needing a tail piece. So braided cord again in the colour of your choice. Now I don't know if you can see that, but the end of that tail, I've actually taken some clear craft glue ahead of time, added it to the end, and as it's drying I've moulded that little end into a little point. So there'll be no fraying there, and it just finishes that tail off nicely. So there we've got all set for the tail. You also need 2 little buttons to be adding those arms on, something that fits just at the top of the shoulder there. And what else will we need? We're going to add a shawl. And a nice soft fabric works really well, and something with a more open weave really works beautifully, because we're going to be fraying the edges with this one. So I've got a little soft pink muslin, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of stitching. The shawl is absolutely simple, there's nothing to it. All of your measurements are there with your pattern templates. And the other thing that you'll need are eyes. So you can use beads for eyes because they're quite small. You do need them to be quite small. I'm probably going to go with a 4mm black glass teddy bear eye, or a 6mm, but I feel like I'm going to go with the 4mm, nice and tiny. So you can see that a black bead would work just as well. We need some pearl threads, and we need some extra strong threads for our construction. A bit of pearl thread for sewing some blanket stitch on a couple of pieces there. And we're going to be filling with polyester filling. So if you have a wool felting needle, that will help us with packing. And also you're going to need your clear craft glue, just in a couple of places there. So that's about it for your materials and requirements. Let's move everything out the way, and we're actually going to, this time we're going to start our mouse. We're going to start on the head. So we need, first of all, our 2 side head pieces. And what we're going to do is we're going to put right sides together. We're going to line up. Now remember, we're making something pretty small here, so you need to be very, very aware of matching everything up nicely. So there we go. So the seam that we're going to first sew is the chin seam. It goes down to the neck here, straight from the top down to the neck. Now I'm going to over sew that first. I'm going to tack that into place first, so that especially when making something small like this in soft sculpture, a little bit of movement can really show up on your project. So it's important that I get that locked into place. I'll just tack that one into place before I sew that on the machine. Now, if you can get that seam down to about a 3mm seam, you want it nice and small. You've got your interfacing on and you're using felt, so you won't have any problems with it fraying away. And I set my machine stitch length to a number 2, so it's nice and small. Make sure that you sew that seam 2 times and you go back and forth on your start and your finish. You can see there that I've got that front chin seam stitched 2 times, and I've taken out my tacking stitch so that I can press that seam open and flat with my fingers. So it just means that when I turn it through, I've got that lovely smooth little front chin seam. So the next step, and probably the most challenging of this project, is sewing in this little front gusset, but I don't want you to be deterred. It's very simple if you just follow some basic little steps. So that mark in the front of your head gusset, or coming in from the wrong side, I've popped a pin through that little centre mark right in the middle there at the seam allowance. Now I'm going to be, because we're putting right sides together, I'm going to come in at my seam allowance straight through the centre of that seam there and push that pin all the way down. Very, very important on something this small that you absolutely line up that centre seam. I mean, it's important with everything, but if you get it wrong on a small sort of project like this, it's really noticeable. So now I'm just going to very carefully make sure that pin head's all the way down. I'm going to take my pin through both layers there, flip my project over and take up a little bit of the underside fabric and push that pin head all the way down. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. So that little front nose section is going to be absolutely spot on. Same thing through both layers, push that pin either side. And then you can see you've got a mark this side and a mark this side. You want to line those up. And if they're lined up either side and your front nose section is lined up, you shouldn't have any problems at all. You can see again, I'm just going through each layer, lining that up again with the other side. So it's the same as putting in any head gusset. It's just it's a little bit trickier because it's small. Pinhead all the way down. So now you can see that little front gusset is absolutely straight. So what I'm going to do is take my extra strong thread and I'm just going to overcast that little one into place, because I'm going to sew this whole head section by hand, because you really won't get it under the machine and be able to sew that nice and accurate. So a little bit of hand sewing with this one, but it's definitely worth it to get that lovely little head shape. So I'm going to continue with that little overcasting stitch right the way around, making sure I anchor in that centre point and back to this side. Then we're going to come back and I'm going to show you how I actually sew that seam. So there I've got that little nose, just the nose section stitched into place. Now I'm continuing with my extra strong thread, just a single strand. We're going to be sewing a stab back stitch. So I'm starting right on that mark there. I'm coming in from behind. I've got a knot in the end of my thread. I'm coming in at my 3 to 4 millimeter seam allowance. Just keep it as small as you can. And I'm going to make my first stitch, which I'm going to keep nice and small given the size of the project. So there's my first stitch. Now I'm going to go straight over the top of that stitch with another one, just to anchor it into place. I've got a video that shows you how to sew the stab back stitch. I'll put the link up the top for you if you want to have a closer look at that. But it's just a linked stitch which we use for soft sculpture, and it's the strongest stitch of all. So I'm going to travel along from behind a little way, and then I'm going to go back into that exit hole that I just came out of, which means my stitch is linked all the way. So travel along from behind, keeping to my seam allowance, and keeping those stitches even and small, and then back again. So you're constantly going back on yourself. So the stitch is stitched the same back and front. That's why it's so strong. So I'm going to continue around to the other side there. And that has my front nose section stitched in, and you can just pop that one through before we sew the rest. Give that a good roll out with the seams. Always do that while you can still get to seams, and check your little nose section and that you've got it all nice and straight and even. You see there? So we can pop that one back through, and then we just continue as before and line up the rest of that side of the head. So I'm going with that same pinning method and following that side head and back head gusset all the way down to the base there. You'll find it'll line up perfectly. Pin that one all the way down, and then you just continue with your overcasting stitch first, and then continue with that stab back stitch all the way to the back. Then you flip it over and you do the same on this side. And remember, we're working on the head gusset. We never do our stitching from the side head. All of our work is done from the head gusset, and it means that you may have to go from this way to here the next time because of the direction that you sew, but always work on this section. So there we go. That's our little mouse head all stitched up and turned through, and I promise you all I'm never going to make you sew a smaller head than that. Mainly because I don't want to sew anything smaller than that. That's the smallest head gusset I'll ever have you put in. My eyes aren't what they used to be either. So now that's all done, let's start filling. So it's very important, doesn't matter how small this project is, this head has to be packed nice and firm, just as you would with a larger project. So I start with my forceps and I'm tucking right into that front muzzle section. You'll find this head is quite easy to fill because you can really tuck it in too with your fingers. So it's quite simple. And as I'm working on this, I'm going to be packing those fibres in using my wool felting needle, and that really will help to keep everything nice and tight. So make sure that you fill out these top of the head seams and everything's plumped, because the firmer it is, the easier it is to sew in that little nose and mouth section that we're going to be adding. So I'm going to get that one all filled up, right up till almost the edge. So here we go, that has our mouse head all nicely packed out. That's like a little rock. You'll be surprised how much filling you can get in there. And I've gone ahead with my felting needle and tapped that all into place, and it's nice and solid and flat there. So now I'm ready to add my neck bolt, which is, as I said before, my system, which is my bolt on my 20mm disc, and I will just be popping that one in there. I've gone ahead and sewn with a double strand of extra strong thread. I've left my needle on, and I've gone around that neck edge with a running stitch very close to the edge there, and I've tied one knot ready because I'm going to tie in around that bolt. If you're going to be using the button joint method, what you need is to take one of your buttons, and I've got 4 strands of my extra strong thread, and I've passed through, up and through just 2 of those holes. So I've got that button secured like that, and just in the same way we would just drop that button in, and we would draw up our threads. In we go. Got your thread ends coming out, and we would tie up those thread ends right up around the base of that button there. So it's done in exactly the same way. You can see I'm just going to pop that one in there. I'm going to pull that one in, really make sure that I've got those threads right up around that bolt. And then I'm going to knot that one off at least 4 times, and I may go around again, stitch around again and tie it up again just to be absolutely sure. So our next step is to add our little nose and mouth section, and it's just a couple of little stitches. I'm using my medium doll needle, and I've got a double strand of 8-ply pearl thread. I'm using black. And I've started off by coming in under that neck joint there to hide that knot and secure it, and then I've come out, then I've dived my needle back into the same hole. So now I want to bring my needle out just a few, it's probably about ½ centimetre from the point, from the junction here, right through that seam line. So I'm going to pull that one all the way through. And then I'm going to pull my threads up, make sure that they're not twisted, and I'm going to go straight in to that nose section right in the centre. And I'm going to bring my needle out at the side on my seam line. So I'm just going to create, it's just a little V shape that I'm going to make, and I want to come out right on that seam line, just a little way up. We don't stitch a full nose with this one because mice don't really have a full leather nose. So I'm holding those stitches and making sure they're going in straight. So there's my little anchoring lip stitch there. And then I'm going to take this thread and I'm going to go around, but I'm going to slip my needle under those first threads there, making sure again that everything stays nice and straight, we're not twisted. Pull that one through, and then I'm going to match that up on the other side, the same distance across, and I'm going to be able to pull that in. So my stitch comes in here to match it with that side, and where I'm going to come out is where you want the edge of your little smile to be. You can check that out by actually wrapping your thread around, and you can test and see where that little edge of that smile. I'm going to make mine quite small for a little mouse mouth. Again, I'm going to pull that one through, make sure that those stitches are not twisted as they go in. And you want to manipulate those so you get a nice little pull in on the front of that mouth there. Then we're going to go through the same under those stitches, not catching any of our felt. Whoops, and I've come unthreaded there. Pull that one up, checking those stitches are straight again. And then we'll dive in at the other side. And you can see there, all it's giving us is just a nice tiny little V section for the nose. We're going to do a little bit of shading on the end of that nose, and we've got a tiny little mouth in there. So I'll dive in that side, my needles become unthreaded, but I'll dive in that other side, come out at the base here, and I can knot off. Make sure you keep that tension up so you get some nice little pull in on that mouth. So there we go, that has our little nose and mouth in there, and you can see it really is just a little indication of a nose and mouth. We don't want to overdo that section because we want to keep that real mouse realistic look. Next we would need to find our eye position. If it helps you to temporarily pin those ears into place, you can do that. You can see that they sit right on that seam line there. That's where they start. And you can see that my eyes are situated about midway between those ears and the top of the muzzle there, just when it starts to curve in on that gusset there. So you want to look at your eye position from every angle to make sure that you've got that right. You can use, I'm just using pins here, just dark little pins, because my eyes are going to be quite small. It gives you a good indication of how it will look. So I can remove those pins because I've already gone ahead and made a mark and taken my awl through, and I've travelled that right down. Remember too with your eye position that they are going to pull in. So next we're going to take a doubled strand of our extra strong thread, and we're going to make that 4 strands by doubling that up, and we take all of those strands through the shank of our eye, open up that loop and take those strands through. So what we end up with is a little eye that's captured beautifully on the end there with all of our strands. I know that seems like a lot, but we need it to be nice and strong. So I've got one all threaded up ready. So there's my little eye on the end. And all you need to do is take your doll needle. You'll need a doll needle for this one. Doesn't have to be as long as mine is here. And just take your needle straight into that eye socket, and you want to bring it out at the back of the head, somewhere quite low down. And pull that little eye all the way through, and you want to make sure that that shank is sitting right in there. We don't have any threads pulled. Even as I pull that now, you can see just how nice and snug we can pull those little eyes in. And then all we need to do is repeat with the other side, dive in that side, and where we want to come out with our needle is straight out through that hole that we first came in at. So you can make it a little bit larger with your awl so it's easier for your needle to find when you're coming back through. Bring out those other thread ends, and then we're going to tie them off against each other. There, I've got both eyes taken through to the back, got those thread ends out, and I've tied one single knot. Now we're going to be tying off these eyes, but we're tying it into the stuffing of the head, not onto the surface, which is why we come out that same little hole. And you can see there that all I've got to do is press on those eyes, and I can pull each of those threads independently. Make sure that I'm sinking those eyes in equally either side. Once you're happy with your result, then you just have to knot off at the back there into that head at least 3 or 4 times, and then when you snip your thread ends, they will tuck nicely into the stuffing of the head. So there we go, that's got our eyes in place. Now once those eyes are where you want them to be, the last little thing that I do, I've got a pastel pencil here. It's an Artist Soft Pastel, but it's in a pencil form. So it's better for detailing because you can sharpen them to a nice sharp point. And all I'm going to do there is I'm just going to add a little bit of colour to that very front nose section, just a tiny little bit. Less is more here. And this is a permanent medium, so you'll find that the colour will last. It's a permanent pigment. So it's just a little bit of colour to the tip there. And then for the eyes, we're just going to make them slightly more realistic by just adding a little bit of shading on each corner, just to give it more of an almond shape. It's probably a bit hard to see here. Depends on the colour of your felt, what you're using. You might be making a little cream mouse or a little white mouse, in which case you could use a softer colour. and you really don't need much. It's just to give that indication of an eye corner on each side. And I've used the 4mm eye here, and it's about spot on. So I wouldn't go much bigger than that. And the technique I just showed you for adding the eyes, you can do that with a bead also. So a bead would work very well if you haven't got the eyes. So there we go. And you may not even be able to see that. It's very, very subtle, but it just makes a little bit of difference there. And that's our little head done. So now we can move on and start. We don't sew our ears on until the end because it's much easier to sew them on when the body is in place. So let's move ahead to the rest of the body. So the very first thing we're going to do with the body is we're going to add any detailing that you want on the front of your little dress. And I'm just going to be stitching down either side of that little piece of lace there, trimming it to the top there. We take it all the way down. It won't matter, it's going to be covered by the skirt, and it's better to have it go all the way down than stop halfway. So I'm just going to stitch that one into place, and then I will add a couple of those little beads just to indicate a couple of buttons. So any work you want to do on the front bodice section here, now is the time to do it. So once you have your detailing in place on your front, we're just going to pop right sides together of that back and front of that body, line up our edges, and you can clip or pin those into place. On each side, make sure that they're all well lined up, and then we're simply going to go ahead and stitch a 4mm seam allowance from the top of that neck. Make sure you back and forth all the way down to the base and back and forth, and I sew those seams 2 times. I'm going to do each side. So that has my 2 body pieces stitched up there, and then I've gone ahead and, just as we did with the base of the neck, I've sewn a double drawstring with extra strong thread around that neck edge and tied and knotted that off, but I've left just enough room for my neck bolt to pass through. So now all we need to do is turn that one through. So that has that little body is all ready to go, all turned through. Make sure that you really roll out those seams and get those shoulders pushed out well. Before we join our head to our body, we need to do our little collar if you're adding that one. All we need to do there is, you've got your little points at the top there. We're just going to put right sides together, and we're simply going to sew a very small seam just across here, and that's just going to pull that little collar in. So just on the machine you can just stitch that straight down there with a seam probably around about 3mm. And once you have that little back seam stitch, you can pop that one through, and you can see that just gives us that little downward facing little collar there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew a tiny blanket stitch around the entire lower edge of this one. I'm just going to come in from behind. I'm using extra strong thread to do this. I'm going to be doing it with a nice fuchsia pink, just to really outline that collar. And I'm just going to be doing tiny little stitches for this one. Just gives that collar a nice little finish. So I'm sewing a blanket stitch. If you haven't sewn a blanket stitch before, I'll put the link up the top there for my video that shows you how to sew this stitch. Of course, this is just a tiny little version. It's still a blanket stitch, it's just very small. And I'm just going through all of the layers with my needle, and I'm bringing my needle out through that loop each time. And I'm just going to make my way around that whole little collar edge, just to give it a bit of detail. right around the edge there. And while you're doing that, you can also go ahead and do exactly the same stitch. Pull those little ears off. I've already done that one there, and stitch around the top edge of those ears with that same little blanket stitch. The extra strong thread's really good for this sort of work, so definitely give that a go. So you can get all that little bit of stitching done, and we'll be ready to join our head to our body. So that has my little collar ready, and you've got a mark on your pattern template that shows you the center, and you need to make a hole through that one. I start with my awl and then I make it large enough for my neck bolt to pass through. So our next step is to add a head to our body. I'm just going to make sure that I've got that little hole is ready at the top there. And we get right up in there. We're going to take that little head, and no, we're not. We're going to first pop that little collar on. You can see how we're going to have that little collar's going to frame up that neckline nicely. Make sure that collar's pushed all the way. And we're going to pop that little bolt through the top of the neck. Make sure that all of our fabric is pushed right down. Now, if you're using the button method, what you would need to do, instead of passing that bolt through that little collar, you would take all of your thread ends through that collar, and then all of your thread ends through the hole in the body, like I've just done here. And with this one, of course, I'm going to find my way right down there. Push. See, I'm pushing that fabric all the way down. And I'm going to be adding my disc and my washer and my nut. And I'll just finger tighten that for now so that I can pull that through and check that all of my fabric is not caught up. Now, if you're using the button joint, you will have all of your threads through. So then you want to separate them off into their two ends again, and you will want to take one of those group of 4 thread ends through one hole in your button, and then the other one through the other hole in your button, the opposite side, and then you should have your button sitting on there and pulled through. So where I tie up, where I do up a bolt, you would then take your thread ends and tie them up and pull those 2 buttons in together. Now, as I said, I've got a video that shows you how I do that one. I've given you that link. Check that out and it will show you very clearly how to put that joint together. So now I'm just going to check I've got everything lined up. Flip that little collar down. Make sure everything's where I want it to be. You can see there, and then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to tighten that nut, and I will drop one little drop of super glue on that nut so that it will never come adrift. That little head is now nicely attached, and now all I need to do is fill that body nice and firm, just as I did the head. I'm going to take those ears off while I do that, because I don't want to crush those ears. So I'm going to use my forceps, and I will add my polyester filling, and I'm going to do the same as I did before and take my wool felting needle and pack all of that in. You want that body nice and firm, and just a little way, pack it all the way, just a little way from the edge. Right, there we go. So that has my little mouse body all filled. Make sure that you really fill those shoulders out too, because we're going to be adding the arms there. And now I've taken my double strand of extra strong thread, and I've just sewn that same running stitch again around the base, just inside from the edge, probably about 4 to 5 millimeters in from the edge. Tied my first knot, and here's when we're going to add our disc. You want to slip that in there. And also, before I do that, just show you my flat surface there with my filling is because I've used my wool felting needle and packed all of that fibre in. Tuck that one in there. Make sure it's nice and central. And then we just want to pull those thread ends in around that base. You're going to have to keep shifting that until that is central. And you want to have it pulled right in. Now obviously it doesn't have to come in to meet, but you need a decent, probably about an inch all the way around pulled in, and then we're going to knot that off at least 4 times. And there we go, that's our base disc all stitched in there nicely. Now we're going to add our felt cover disc over the base, which I have all glued up with my clear craft glue, but first we're going to incorporate the tail. Now my tail piece I cut to 15 centimeters, and then I frayed off the end. That's just so that I can slip it in at the back here and glue that into place underneath that little felt template that we're going to be putting in. So I'm just going to add a little bit more glue there, make sure that it is lined up at the base. Just going to tuck that one in there. I'm going by my centre front, which is my little ribbon lace section there. Push all those out the way and then just drop that disc straight over the top. Make sure that's all lined up there. Press that one into place, and that just gives us a really nice finish to the base. Get that one all pressed into place, and then we're going to stand that one up nice and flat, and we're going to let that dry before we go ahead and do our stitching around that. We're just going to do a nice blanket applique around that base. So we might put our little mouse aside for now. And let's get started on those arms. So as I showed you earlier, I already have one of my little arms already stitched up and all done. And we're going to be using that same blanket stitch that we did before. And I'm just doing mine with extra strong thread again. I've got those edges all lined up. Now this time we're putting wrong sides together because we're not turning this one through. Much easier if we do it this way. So I'm just going to start a little way from the top because we're going to be adding our chenille sticks in there. So just coming in from between those layers, coming actually through the felt. That way I can hide my knot in there. And I'm just going to sew a really tiny little blanket stitch, just the same as on the ears and around that little collar that we did before. Make sure that you really anchor those stitches in place, keep them nice and small and nice and tight because we don't want anything coming through. That's our actual seam. So I'm going to make my way around that whole lower edge, and I'm going to finish up about level again. We just need this top section left open so we can slip our little chenille sticks in. Okay, so that's got my little arm all stitched up, and I've left my needle and thread on because I'm going to continue sewing that up. So the next thing you need to do is cut a couple of little chenille sticks. Now the exact measurement, you can see that they've got a little bend in the middle. The exact measurement of this length here is 5.5 centimeters, and it's just long enough to go to the end of the little hand and leave the top of the shoulder open because we're going to be sewing a button through there, so we don't want it to extend. And you need 2 of those exactly the same. What you want to do is fold them in the middle like I have. You want to lay them on top of each other, and then we're going to take them, open up that end, of our arm, and we're going to tuck them all the way down, right down to that hand, and pull our little arm up over it. So what that does is it fills out that arm, and it also makes it very poseable, and it's actually very strong. Before I close that opening, I like to just top up that shoulder with a little bit of filling, and the reason I do that too is I like to go sort of just either side of those chenille sticks, just to cover those little sharp ends. Just stops them poking through. They usually don't, but just like to be sure. So it's just a little bit, just to pad out that top of that arm. So that it's not completely flat, because we will be sewing that button through to join those arms on to the body, and that's going to flatten it anyway. So tucking that one in there, you can even take your wool felting needle and tuck in all those ends. Where would we be without our wool felting needles? If you haven't got one, get one. Okay, so that's just enough to fill that out. Now all I need to do is continue on with my blanket stitch around to close up that opening. So we can put those arms aside, and now our base disc should be dry, and we can go ahead and sew our blanket applique stitch. Now I've just come in underneath there to hide my knot. I'm using pearl thread, I'm using an 8-ply, and I've just come out right on the edge of that little disc there, and we're sewing a blanket applique stitch, which I do also have a video for, which I will put the link up the top there. This one's a bit different because we're doing it on a 3D project, but the concept is the same. So just anchoring in my first stitch there. So blanket applique is just going through all of our layers and coming out on the edge of our shape that we're appliquing on to our project, and just taking up some of that underside fabric, which in this case is the side of the body, and bringing our needle through the loop and pulling those stitches in, so it's just like a blanket stitch, except that it's not on an edge. Pulling that one through the loop, keeping my stitches probably about 4 to 5 millimeters, keeping them nice and even, and make sure that you rotate your work as you go. Little mouse is not helping there, poking her tail through. Out we go. And pull that one in, and I'll go either side of that tail and make sure that I catch some of that tail so that it's all really nicely anchored in. So I'm going to make my way all the way around that disc. Right, so here we are, we're ready to add her little finished arms, and I've got a double strand, a nice long double strand of extra strong thread on my medium doll needle. I've gone ahead and put a pin in either side of those shoulders, which is where I want those arms to sit. Make sure you check it, you need to have them sit out just nice and straight, a nice straight little shoulder. There, you don't want them sitting too low and you don't want them sitting too high. So a nice natural drop off of that shoulder. And as I said, I've put a pin in there. Now we're just going to be tying these on in the most simple way, because this is not a toy that's going to be played with, so they really do just need to be tied on. So I'm adding this arm first, so I start from the opposite side, and I'm going to go in just below where my other arm is going to be attached, take my needle through and come out right where I have my pin, just one side of that pin. Pull that one through, Right, so I've had a little camera glitch here, so I'm going to have to just jump ahead a little minute here. So I've just passed that needle through and back to do your arms. As we come back through, we bring our needle through our arm and the little button, and then back through the little button, back through the arm, and back out underneath the arm here. The other arm wouldn't be on. And all you need to do is tie those ends off. Now don't tie them so tight that she's squeezed right in at the shoulders. You just want that nicely settled. And then all you do is repeat the process with the other side, only this time you'll be coming in underneath the arm here. So little camera glitch, sorry about that, not much I can do about it. Very straightforward though in getting those little arms into place. Okay, so we've got our arms in place, and now we currently have our little deaf mouse. She's a lot like me, isn't she? Completely deaf. So now we're going to add our ears. So I've pinned in the first one there, and I'm going to show you how to get that lovely curve. And that is, we start and put your pin through, straight through at the very beginning there. And it's just, you can see the distance I've got there. It just sort of sits at the top of head. It's a bit easy with this project because the ears sit best right on the seam line. So match it up with the other side, and here's where you get one into place and then make sure the other one's the same. I think that one's going to go a little bit further back. Have a little play with it. It's worth getting it right because it will annoy you if it isn't right, or it would annoy me. And then our next pin travels a little way back. We're going to pull that ear back and almost hit that seam line again, and it's just a small way back, and that gives us our nice curl. Then we can bring it back on itself, and it almost does it for you. That final little pin goes in the base of that ear like we did before at the start, and bring that ear around. It's just a matter of having a little play with it and making sure that they're all matched up, and look at from the top too that you've got it exactly the same position forward. I need to drop that back a bit. And once you've got it all where you want, follow that curve around with your pins. Drop another one in the back there. That will all hold it in place, and look at it from behind as well, and make sure it's all exactly right. And then we will have a look at, I'll have a little play with that, and then we will have a look at how to sew those on. So to sew these ears on, I'm using my extra strong thread. I've got a single strand with a knot in the end. I'm using my normal hand sewing needle. Mine is a Dana, so it's fairly long, but I don't actually use a doll needle here because the head's quite small. So I've come in from behind at the back of the head there, and I sunk my knot into the back of the head. But where I've come out is right on that first starting point of that ear there. And so my first stitch is going to go into the base of that ear, right where I've got that pin, capturing some of that ear, and then I'm going to travel to the back of that ear. Nobody likes sewing ears on, by the way. It's something that you master, but you never end up enjoying. If you ever meet anyone who says, I love sewing ears on, they're lying. But it's best to get them done and not procrastinate. Don't leave them till absolute last, or they'll sit there for days with no ears. They'll be little deaf animals. Well, that's me anyway. I'm guilty of that. So that's my first stitch in. And because I've come out around the edge of the base of that ear, now I can just dive in and take some of that ear, go into the head and come out close to the very base there. So I'm anchoring them in a few points first, leaving all my pins in. So now I'll take some of that ear and I'll come out back close to the top again, because we need about 3 anchoring stitches at the top and the base for those ears to be really, really secure. Pulling that one all the way through, and by doing it this way, you're not just sewing them to the surface of that fabric there, you're actually sculpting them in by going back and forth. So all I'm going to do is travel back and forth and coming out in a different position each time until I've captured that whole edge. And make sure that you've got a good 3 stitches at the start and at the finish. When you finish, you can just finish off at the back of the head where it won't be seen and knot those off. So practice makes perfect with sewing ears on, and it takes me a while too. So if you feel like it takes you forever, well, it takes me a while too, but it's worth getting them right. So I'm going to get both of those little ears stitched into place. So there we go, I've got my little mouse's ears all sewn nicely into place. We're just going to pop her aside because we're going to start on her skirt section. Now I've gone ahead and I have pressed into place and stitched on my 3 little hearts, that little design there. I've centered it into right in the middle of that rectangle piece. You've got your measurements in with your pattern templates. And I've set it just a little way from the edge, but I have turned that edge under. I've pressed that edge under 1 centimetre. So the length for this, the way that I've done it, the measurements, will suit this one perfectly. We're now going to go ahead. Now these little hearts, you can machine them on. You can do what I've done. I've sewn it with a blanket applique stitch, whatever you like, and anything else you want to add to the front of this skirt. Now is a good time to do that. So now that that edge is turned under just that 1 centimetre, I'm going to take that to the machine and I'm going to add my lace around the base there. I will just sit that one over just to give it a nice little finish, and it does tend to just kick out at the bottom, which looks really sweet on this project. So I'm going to go ahead and get that piece stitched into place. Once you have that lace in place, I've then gone ahead and I've just sewn a little zigzag. You might have an overlocker or serger, serge that top edge, stop it from fraying away. And our next step then is just to put right sides together, and we're just going to sew that centre back seam. We'll just keep that to our standard, just about 1/4 inch. And stitch across here. Make sure you're back and forth on the start and finish there, and then I'm going to press that seam open and flat. And that has created my little skirt with that back seam done. I've got everything pressed nice and flat, and you can see that I've gone ahead and I've turned under that top edge just 1 centimetre and given that a good press. So now there's 2 ways that you can pull this skirt in. You can sew around with a straight stitch and create a casing and add a little bit of fine elastic to pull that in around her waist, or you can do what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to make 2 rows, a running stitch, 2 rows with my pearl thread, starting at the front and coming all the way around, and then 1 right below it, and that will give me a drawstring to pull in around her waist and give a little tie and a bow, which just adds a little bit of extra detail if you want that. And you can do that at the front. You can start at the front, or if you want your tie to be at the back, you can start at the back. So I've marked in my centre point, right lining up with that little heart there. So I'm just going to take that one out, and I'm going to start my stitch just about 1/2 centimetre down. And I'm going to keep my running stitch nice and small so that we get some really nice fine little gathers. And I'm just going to work my way all the way around that one, that top edge, leaving my tail ends hanging because that's going to be my tie up. So I'm going to go all the way around until I come back to here and leave a tail end hanging. Then I'm going to sew another line just directly below it, just because that gives us a nice flat even gather. So there you can see that little skirt, that drawstring now all pulled in there, and I've been able to tie up that little bow at the front, and I've added a couple of little beads at the front there. Hope you can see that. And that just gives her that beautiful little skirt. So we're going to pop that one aside, because the last thing we're going to do for her clothing is her little shawl. Now I've got my square of my little pink muslin, and as I said at the beginning, you want this shawl to be made in quite a soft fabric. And the first thing I've done, now obviously you can decorate this any way you like, I've just taken it to the machine and done a decorative stitch. It's around about just about an inch in all the way around. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fray away those edges. So that's why you need that little open weave. And I will fray it away to probably just over 1 centimetre. And it really does give it a lovely soft little edge. You can trim it up afterwards if it's not completely straight. But I'm going to do that to each edge, probably about up close to this edge of stitching here. So there you can see I've just frayed those edges away, and now I've just folded that scarf in half, the little shawl, and we're just going to drop that over her shoulders, and it's just as simple as that. It tucks in nicely there. You can throw a couple of stitches in there to hold it, and you've got that lovely little V at the back, and you can see there why you need that nice softness of that fabric for it to drape nicely. So that's it for her little outfit, and now she needs her little basket to hold with all of her goodies in it. So let's get started on that. So the first thing we need to do to make our little basket, so we've got our outside pieces and our inside pieces, and they're all made up in the same way. We take two and we put right sides together, and we're just going to stitch down one side, just with our 4mm seam allowance. Make sure you're back and forth on the top and down to the bottom there. And then we do the same with these two pieces. Down one side. Then we're going to open them up and press that seam out as much as you can, nice and flat. And then we're going to join the two sides together so that that will give us our little basket shape. So join together like that around the entire outer edge. I'm going to get those stitched up and you're going to see what I mean. And you do exactly the same thing with the inside pieces. So here we've got our two little stitched little basket shapes, our outside and our inside. The inside one is a tiny bit shorter, and that's so that it can slip inside. So what we're going to be doing is you want to press out with your edges, your seams here, as flat as possible, because we're going to be popping one inside the other. And I've pressed mine as flat as I can, and I'm going to be lining up each of those seams. And it's helpful to have your little clips or pins while you do it, but I'm just going to tuck that all in to give you an idea. I want to pull that in so that lining sits right in. Meet those seams up at every point. You'll end up with a nice little lined inside. We're going to blanket stitch the top edge, but before we do that we're going to have to add our handle. So the little handle, I've actually got my piece is exactly 9 centimetres, but I've got just over 1 centimetre on each edge that I've frayed away so that it makes it easier to glue it into that basket. And I said to you about wrapping that braided cord, so it gives you a nice firm little handle that holds itself well compared to your braided cord, which is actually quite soft. It's very simple to do, it's easier than it looks, and I've just taken some pearl thread and I've tied a couple of knots around where I want to start, and you simply just wrap that cord. And you might feel like, you know, I'm not getting anywhere, but you're just surprised how quickly that happens. You can use a thicker pearl thread if you like, and it really does just hold itself as you go. Just move further along, keep that tension up, and you'll find you'll be able to wrap that whole length. You can see there I've got that nice little binding happening there, and of course you can do it in different colors as well. So that's what I've done with my little piece of cord. I've left the ends and then I frayed them out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue, tuck those little edges in between those two layers, make sure it's all as flat as I can make it, and I'm going to glue them in, one either side, opposite sides. You don't do it on a junction, you don't do it where the seam is, you do it in the middle of a centre panel. And I'll make sure those edges are all tucked in, and I'll get those glued into place with my clear craft glue, and then we can let that sit and dry perfectly. You can add a little bit more glue around the edges if you like once you've got that all settled. Then we'll let that dry, we can trim that edge up, and then we're going to do our final blanket stitching. So that has my little basket all dry, and I've gone around and just trimmed that top edge so everything's nice and even. And I've just started my blanket stitch, and I have just a single strand of my pearl thread, and I've got a knot in the end, and I've just started in between those two layers, and I've been able to come out, and I'm just going to sew that stitch right the way around, that same blanket stitch that we've been using throughout. Just make sure you're going through all the layers, and that's going to bind those two edges together, and it's going to take away that raw edge. Of course you can use any colour you like, and it also gives that lovely look of that little rolled edge on that basket. So I'm just going to make my way around that one until that whole top edge is done. There we go, so that has our little completed basket, and it's really a strong little handle there, so you'll be able to slip that over her arm. And now, so mine is going to be filled with little rolls of fabric, little fabric fat quarters, like she's been fabric shopping. And the way that I've done that is I've just taken my 4-inch squares and I fold them in to meet in the middle, and then I've just rolled them up into little rolls, just as simple as that, and tied them with a little bit of twine there, and it's so cute. Now there's any number of things that you could stash in this little basket. I just wanted a little mini me, so I'm going to fill that one up with all of those different colours, and let's put her together and see how she looks. So here we have the latest addition to our little Pay It Forward community. I'm not just a mouse, I'm a member of this family. I certainly hope you're going to make this little one a little part of your collection. Thank you for indulging me today and letting me share this one with you. I absolutely have loved every little part of this one. This little pattern has always brought me so much joy, and my favourite part is in the detail. So there's so many different things you can do there. I know you're going to get all very creative with that little basket of goodies. You could, perhaps you're making this to give as a gift, you could give it as a gift to a knitter, and you could make up some little balls of wool in there, some little knitting needles, you could fill it with goodies, some little treats or market little food produce, so many different things that you could do. I hope you've really enjoyed it as much as I have bringing it to you. Well, thank you all for joining me today. I had a fantastic week this week. I just particularly enjoyed this little project. So everybody come and join our Facebook group. I'm going to put the link in the description box below. And I want you to share your creations, which you can do on our Facebook page. And it's a great little group, and it's very encouraging, and you can see what everybody else is doing. But I want to see all of these beautiful mice and all of these little things. I want to see what everybody's going to put in their baskets. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed this video, you could give me a thumbs up. That would be absolutely beaut. Thank you, Alison, for keeping that Facebook group going along beautifully, and look forward to seeing more of you there. You can keep talking to me on Instagram. If I haven't responded to you on Instagram and you've sent me a message, definitely send it to me again, because I always respond. Sometimes Instagram doesn't let me see certain things, so just have to persevere there, and I don't want to miss out on hearing from you all. And you can also follow me on Pinterest. It's just Lisa Pay on Pinterest. You can have a look at our community board called You Made It Because You All Did, and I love to post pictures of your beautiful work there. So thank you all for your support. Looking forward to more exciting things with you all. Everybody have a great week. Make sure you stay safe, make sure you stay creative, and remember all of those good things that come to you in your day. Make sure that you pay them forward. And until next time, it's hooroo from me.